Hi everybody, welcome. We're going to be working on a simple landscape today, and we're letting gravity do most of the work for us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with 1/8 of a sheet of paper, and what I do with a piece of paper is I just take a piece of blue tape and wrap it over and then stick it onto my board so that way it doesn't fall off on me. The board is angled a little bit. I have some 2-inch tape underneath here that you can't see, but it is an angle here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with some ultramarine blue, which is one of my favorite colors for skies, of course. Big puddle of it. Use a lot of water, a lot of color. Use a big enough brush that can hold a lot of paint. And this is a squirrel mop brush. And I'm going to start at the top. And the key to this technique is to have you got to have the paint with a little bit of water in it. I kind of had pure paint right there. But what you got to do is you got to get a big puddle of water and color that go downhill on you and sit. And because we're tilted a little bit, gravity's going to move everything this direction. And if you got that big puddle of water and color, you've got lots of time to change the colors and come back and do other things. I want to grab some Imperial purple and put it at the top. I could put some purple at the top here now if I wanted to. That wasn't not a lot of color in that guy. Let's get my colors a little bit closer here. So you can go back into things while they're still wet too, and it doesn't mess things up. So now I'm keep bringing this downhill. I'm going to switch to some blues. Let me make sure I get that mixed up enough so it's not just pure paint on the brush. And switch to some cerulean blue down here. Make it a little bit more of a greenish color. And remember, gravity's doing most of the work for us because it's moving things downhill on us. And then as I get further down into where the foreground is eventually going to be, I'm going to lighten it up a little bit, and I'm going to switch to some yellow ochre. Now with the yellow ochre, don't put it into the blue, put it underneath the blue and let them touch and kiss. And when you do that, you're going to find it doesn't really make a green on you too much. You can go back and forth if you didn't get a nice enough mixture. Now, because we're working so wet and gravity's moving things for us, you're not really getting streaking up in here. I'll go back with some of the blue here. I'm going to make it a little bit darker at the bottom. I missed a couple spots of white in the paper. I think I'm just going to leave that. And this is our first beautiful wash. Really didn't get hard edges anywhere because we kept things nice and wet. Water was moving things downhill the entire time. This is at a slight tilt, so gravity is your best friend in this exercise. What I have to do now is take a paper towel and clean up underneath the paper because that will form water blossoms later. And I have to dry this, and then we're going to go to the second stage after this. All right, I used a hairdryer in the last step and dried the paper, and that's why it's curling on me a little bit. This was an accident. I got some water down here, and I started blowing everything around, and it kind of moved around on me. This is the sort of thing that back in the day I used to try to correct, and then it would end up screwing up the entire painting. Don't worry about this, because if I can be completely honest, you're probably going to screw up 10 more times, so don't worry about that little mistake. We can hide that later. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into here with some ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, and I'm going to make kind of just a little darker mixture of the colors I was using before. And I'm going to water it down quite a bit too. And I've switched to a smaller squirrel mop brush. This is a number 2 squirrel mop brush, holds a lot of water, a lot of paint. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start up here. I'm thinking about rule of thirds here. So that's about rule of thirds. It's close enough. And I'm going to make a darker mountain here. Hilltops of some sort. And then I'm going to rinse the brush off completely, clean water, come back in with water, let that touch and kiss. And what that's going to do, some of the color is going to come downhill, not all of it. Rinse the brush off again with some water, clean water, go and touch underneath it. Same thing here, and do this until you don't see any color coming down. So you've just created a graduated wash from dark to light. Now, if you still want to make some things dark, here's your chance to do it, because it's still really wet, and you can see that. You tilt the board a little bit, you can see the gloss, the glistening. While things are wet, you can continue to drop color into it, but just be careful, because you don't want to go back and forth over this too much. Now, these colors stay in the paper too much. The more you go back and forth, the more you're going to start to lift. I'm going to let that dry before I get to the next layer, so I'm going to hit this with the hairdryer again. All right, checking the paper. doesn't feel cold to the touch. It's obviously not wet, which means that layer is dry. So this looked really dark when I put it on, didn't it? And now it isn't very dark. And that's one of the hard things about watercolor. You just have to remember that what it looks like, 20 minutes later, it's gonna look a little bit different. All right, now it's time for the second layer. So I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this combination of the same colors and yellow ochre into the blues, burnt sienna. Starts to kind of make a green, so I'm just kind of mixing up a bunch of colors in my palette right now. I used a little bit of the purple. And I'm gonna come into here and I'm gonna go over this section now and make this a little bit further down. And the thing about this to make this really work is that you've got to make this layer darker than the last layer. Otherwise, it's not going to read as coming forward. And that does look darker. And you got to remember, gravity is going to move things downhill. It's going to lighten things up considerably too. So if it looks way too dark, you're probably okay. And then at some point in time, rinse the brush out, get less paint, more water. I changed the color temperature up a little bit. I'm bringing this downhill here. And rinse the brush off again, cleanish water. Come in here with just pure water, let it touch and kiss. Pure water again, touch and kiss. And bring everything downhill. Now, this mountain here does look darker than that one, so it's gonna read as coming forward. What I'm doing now is I'm wicking up the excess water with the thirsty brush and a paper towel. Trying not to lift off this color too much. If you want to drop darker colors into here while things are still wet, this is your chance to do so. That little mistake's going to get hidden in just a few minutes. I'm not too worried about that at all. What I have to do now is I have to dry this layer. Now we're going on to the third layer. This is dry. You can touch it, and it doesn't feel cold to the touch. It's not wet, of course. This is a little bit darker than this area, so this indicates that that's coming forward because of perspective. And now let's put some detail into here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna mix up some decently strong color. Ultramarine blue and burnt sienna make a very nice dark color. Very granulating too. We've used a bunch of the ultramarine blue up in this area. Yellow ochre at this point in time it can gray things down, but it's not really gonna darken it too much. And what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna come into here and I'm gonna put some sort of a, I don't know, let's start up in this area. So put some sort of a ridge here. And I'm not using a photo reference, I'm just completely making this up. I'm gonna constantly be changing this color temperature. So I'm gonna make things a little bit bluer in some sections. I'm gonna grab some of that purple color that I used at the very beginning. Drop it into the same value, because if you keep changing the colors, it makes it just so much more interesting than the same color across the whole thing. I'm constantly changing my color temperature, and I'm trying not to create patterns. If I do it in one section, don't try to go orange, blue, orange. It's nature. Make it just kind of unusual and random. That's what nature is. So this is definitely darker, so this is going to read as coming forward. All right. See, now we've got the three layers. Now while this guy is still wet, I'm using a squirrel mop brush right now. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna switch to a smaller brush. I have a number 8. This is a silver black velvet brush. I love these guys. And I'm gonna grab the same dirty mixture of color from my palette. And I'm gonna come up into here, and I gotta kind of keep my hand out of wet paint. This is the hardest thing about doing this. I'm gonna come up into here and start putting some tree shapes. Tree shapes, bush shapes, it can be anything. I'll switch to a smaller brush also. So we're gonna have those coming up above the horizon line here. And there's just some, change that color temperature up. Always grabbing some different color. We got some little branches, do a little bit of spattering. While things are still wet, you got a lot of time to play with it, which is the fun thing. I'm gonna grab a smaller brush here, trying to find my rigger. And I'm gonna come up in here and I'm gonna drop in some more things in here. Even smaller brush. Do a little bit of spattering. You could drop in some darker color into these sections while it's still wet. Grabbing some darker color again. Oops, I just spattered into the sky. I didn't mean to do that. So while things are still wet, with a cleanish paper towel, you can usually get it off, but usually you don't notice that until it's too late. And then there's another trick to fix that. I'll do another video on that later. So we got some just trees, some branches here, just a little something coming out there. And then the other thing that I love to do, just do a little some more details right here. Some things sticking above the horizon line here. And we have we've got foreground, middle ground, and background in this guy already. Now, while this is still wet, I do want to mix up some really strong dark. And when you mix up your darks, it's going to be mostly paint, less water, and you got to use dark enough colors. I'm going to drop in a couple of darks there. 1, 2, let's do 3 little spots of black. Right there also. And what that's going to do is that's going to help move your eye throughout the piece a little bit. I also might take a little bit of the black and put it right into that little tree there. And this is all still really wet, so it's going to all end up going downhill a little bit. And it's going to lighten up quite a bit too, and I know that. I'm going to step back and see how I feel about this. And coming back into it here with my rigger brush, I actually found my really good rigger brush. I did not have it out here just a few minutes ago. And I got to turn this slightly sideways there so I can actually get to the angles here. I don't like some of these shapes. I feel like they're too kind of similar, so I'm trying to make some smaller branch shapes. And I'm going to turn that sideways here. I can get just some different marks down here. This is starting to dry a little bit, so I'm getting hard edges. So just doing a little bit of calligraphy. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to lay the painting flat. I'm going to get to the edge of the paper here. I like to do clean up on all 4 because water is going underneath this paper right now. And that will form a water blossom. So tilt this up and get the water underneath the paper, out from underneath there. I'll tilt it back up again. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of this color called Lavender by Holbein. It's got a little bit of white in it. And it's really good for just doing a little bit of kind of opaques. And what the opaques do is they sit on top of the surface and create another sense of depth within the painting. So while things are still wet, drop a little bit of that opaque into it. And I'm looking at this. That area that was a disaster at the very beginning has been hidden. You're not even going to notice that now. Because there's lots of other problems. That's why I always tell people, you're going to make 5 other mistakes. Don't stress about stuff at the very beginning. These trees are all too much the same value right now. Let's make some darker branches. Okay. That way it reads as coming forward a little bit. It also creates a little bit more depth within the trees. Drop in some darker darks there. All right, let's dry this, and then we're going to go to the final stage here. All right, so I didn't dry this part yet. You can see that this is visually still wet, but I want to finish up with the stars. Because this is kind of a dark nighttime scene, I can kind of see some stars or a moon up here. I'm not going to do a moon right now, but I want to do some stars. You can do stars with masking fluid and spatter masking fluid, but you have to do that first and then peel it off at the very end. Or what you can do, which I know technically is cheating according to some people, is you can take a little bit of white paint, titanium, and you can spatter a little bit of that. I'm covering the areas I don't want the paint to go. You're trying to make it so it's relatively thick. I dried the painting with the hairdryer, did a little bit more spattering while I was doing that, and then I cleaned up the board a little bit. And I'm looking at this painting. I could still make some things darker if I want to, but I think it's just a pretty good warm-up. Going from one color to another color, learning how to feather colors, doing a graduated wash, going from dark to light, dark to light, dark to light. Try not to do too much. Remember to use a lot of water and to let gravity do the work for you. So I hope everybody enjoyed this painting demonstration today and that everybody survived it, which I would make that joke. But if you got any questions, please send me emails or put comments in the YouTube video. If you like this content, hit subscribe. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today, and happy painting.